History 1. I was on a road trip to Reno one night to meet my buddies for a music festival. I was on Highway 50, which is mostly just desert the whole way. I chose to drive at night to avoid traffic. I left my house around 8 p.m., and my GPS said I'd get to my friend Sam's cabin around midnight. On long drives, I usually listen to podcasts because I get tired of music after a while. I started listening to spooky stories to pass the time since they made the hours fly by. Since I was on a road trip, I picked road trip-themed stories. About 3 hours into the drive, I had to stop for gas, so I added a detour to my route. The GPS showed me the closest gas station a few miles away. I took the next exit ramp into some sketchy-looking area. There were a few houses and then just desert. It was an odd place for houses. I pulled up to a generic gas station, the only light source for miles. There were only 4 pumps at this little station. I pulled up to the one closest to the door. I went inside to pay for the gas and buy a couple of snacks. The guy working there seemed like a real country bumpkin. He had a dirty beard, a stained red trucker hat, and he spoke kind of creepy-like. But out in the middle of nowhere, I didn't know what else to expect. He tried making conversation, asking where I was from. I told him I was from Nevada. I asked if he got a lot of customers here. A weird question in hindsight, but whatever. He said, "VJN, not really, not my kind at least." BGKJ, and gave me a weird smile. I had no idea what that meant, but it felt off and kind of creepy. The man then looked out the window toward my car and said, "VJN, is that your friend?" DJK? I looked outside and saw someone walking quickly into the darkness by my car. I said, "VJN, I don't know them." DJKJ, and asked what that guy just did. The cashier shrugged and said he didn't see. Being an attractive girl in her 20s, I deal with creepy stuff often, so I almost asked the cashier to walk me outside. But honestly, he creeped me out too. I went outside to start filling up my car. I looked around the empty lot. There was just the hum of a light above me and the sound of the cold night breeze. No cars or lights as far as I could see. Where did that guy go? And what was he doing? I looked at the gas station window and saw the cashier looking directly at me. I wondered if he was making sure I was okay after that sketchy person ran off. But then he started waving at me slowly. It was disgustingly creepy, and I wanted to get out of there. I paid for $40 worth of gas. Around the 30 mark, I heard a voice from the building. I looked over, expecting it to be the cashier, but he was still inside, staring at me. Then I noticed a man peering around the right side of the gas station. He was waving his hands, motioning for me to come over, and I'm pretty sure he had a creepy smile on his face, too. I started waving and calling for the cashier, but he just stood there, motionless. I looked back at the creepy guy. He wasn't hiding behind the wall anymore. He was standing fully exposed. When he noticed me looking at him, he started walking towards me. I removed the nozzle from my gas tank and left it dangling. I called for the cashier one more time, but he still just stood there watching me. I felt my heart in my throat. This was a textbook scene from one of those scary stories I'd been listening to. I jumped in my car and sped out of there, back onto the deserted road and eventually back onto the highway. My heart was racing for a few minutes. Needless to say, I stopped listening to spooky stories for the rest of the trip. I got to Sam's cabin about an hour after that ordeal. I still have no idea what to make of it. History 2. I rent a house in Biloxi, Mississippi. It's a small place, but just right for me and my dog, Buddy. The backyard is big enough for Buddy to run around, and the neighborhood is nice and quiet. We're close to the beach, which is great. This all happened on a summer night, probably a Thursday. I had just finished making my lunch for the next day and cleaned up the kitchen before heading to bed. I was lying in bed, watching some scary videos on YouTube. I like to think these videos prepare me for worst-case scenarios like home invasions. I guess many people feel that way, but we never really expect it to happen to us. It was around 11:30 at night, and I was watching a video when the doorbell rang. Buddy started barking immediately. Hearing the doorbell ring that late is pretty unsettling. It raises a lot of questions like, who could it be and what do they want at this hour? I didn't get out of bed. I wasn't going to check who it was. The sound of the doorbell had me scared stiff. Buddy is a pretty big dog and his bark is loud, so I hoped it would scare off anyone with bad intentions. But then the doorbell rang again. The dread of wondering who was out there got worse, especially when the doorbell was followed by loud knocking. Still, I didn't leave my bed. When the knocking finally stopped, I felt a little relieved. Since the house is only one floor, my bedroom window looks out to the street in front of the house. I decided to peek out the window to see if anyone was walking down the street. I stood there for about 30 seconds before I heard footsteps right outside the window. I quickly jumped back into bed and told Buddy to be quiet. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence, saying, "I see you, open the window." The voice was right outside the window. Buddy started barking like crazy. I couldn't keep pretending to be asleep. I turned to look at the window and saw a creepy man with wide eyes staring back at me. Only the bug screen separated us. I asked, "What do you want?" He repeated, "Can you let me in? It's cold out here." But it was a hot midsummer night in Mississippi. I told him to leave or I'd call the police. That VGITM sees when he tried lifting the screen and, realizing he couldn't, started punching it to break a hole. I quickly shut and locked the window. I was shocked Buddy's barking wasn't scaring him off. I called 911 and asked for the police to come. Just like in many stories, the police arrived too late. The man was gone. He was probably on some kind of drugs. His voice and his comment about the cold gave it away. I don't think I could have handled it any differently other than locking the window right away and calling 911. History 3. When I was 16 years old, I'd sometimes crash at my buddy Mike's place. He had this awesome loft bedroom on its own floor, connected to the attic by a short flight of stairs. When we were younger, we'd have these epic hide-and-seek games with our friends, and his brother Bobby. Mike lived in that big house with his mom and Bobby. His dad was always well off, and after the divorce, he still paid for the house so they could live there. Mike's mom was the type to head into town every night, dressed in tight white pants and all that. When I was 16, I didn't really get what she was up to, but it meant Mike usually had the house to himself on weekend nights. One of those nights, we smoked a bit of weed and played Super Smash Bros. For hours. Later, we decided to watch some scary videos. We were on our third video, all about pizza delivery horror stories, which, funny enough, made us crave pizza. So we called one of the only places open past 10 and ordered a pie. As we finished the video, we started another one about Craigslist horror stories. Just as we were getting genuinely spooked, we heard a crash from the attic. It sounded like a box falling and spilling out plastic toys. Mike and I looked at each other, totally freaked out. We paused the video, and Mike called out for his brother Bobby, who wasn't supposed to be home. It was our first instinct to think it was Bobby trying to scare us, but that would mean he'd been hiding in the attic for hours, which seemed unlikely. This only made things creepier. Mike went up the few carpeted stairs to the attic door and opened it, flicking on the light. I stood behind, watching. He quickly said he saw what it was. A box of Hot Wheels had fallen and spilled out. He left it as it was, saying he'd clean it up tomorrow. He shut the attic door, and right then, the doorbell rang, making us both jump. We were just really tense from the past half hour. We went downstairs to pay for the pizza and grabbed some plates to eat. We planned to take the rest of the pizza back up to his room. While we were downstairs, we heard a noise from upstairs, in the attic. The kitchen was below Mike's room, and the living room was below the attic, which had a higher ceiling. We went into the living room to listen, and sure enough, we heard a faint bump, just loud enough to notice. We looked at each other with wide eyes. Mike said it might be an animal in the attic, like in those YouTube videos where raccoons crawl through holes in the roof. He somehow convinced me to check it out, though I don't know why we were making a joke of it. I guess neither of us wanted to admit how freaked out we were. We went back to his room, and he gave me this huge flashlight. I opened the attic door and he stood right behind me. I turned on the flashlight and stepped inside. I looked at the spilled Hot Wheels, then around at the piles of boxes. "Why am I doing this?" I said to Mike, who just laughed and told me to keep looking. I stepped a bit deeper into the attic, peeking behind a tall pile of boxes. Suddenly I felt two hands push me from behind. I stumbled forward and almost fell, hearing Mike's laugh. I called him a jerk. But then, In response to my loud stumble, something moved from beyond another pile of boxes. I took a couple more steps and shined the flashlight, and I froze. There was a guy hunched behind the boxes, looking right at me. I ran out of the attic, pushing Mike out of the way and screaming, "Go! Run!" We bolted out of the house to the neighbor's place, but they weren't home. We waited on their stoop, calling 911 and Mike's mom, who sounded kind of drunk and rushed home from her date or whatever. The police searched the house and found the back door wide open, indicating the guy escaped that way, probably climbing a fence to a neighboring yard. From what I saw, the man looked young, maybe in his early 30s, with short black hair and facial hair. I was just glad it wasn't my house, because I wouldn't have felt safe sleeping there for a long time. Mike was scared to sleep in his room for quite a while after that.